It was a cool autumn morning when I first heard the news. My father had passed away. The kind of news that stops your heart for a moment, then leaves you in a kind of numbness. I wasn't ready for this. Nobody ever is, right? We had just celebrated my father's 65th birthday a few months ago. He had been in good health. At least, that's what I thought. But the doctor's words shattered the illusion. Terminal cancer. No treatment left. My father, the man who had always been the pillar of our family, was slipping away right before my eyes. The weeks leading up to his death were a blur. I spent every day by his bedside in the hospital, trying to be strong, trying to keep things together. But it wasn't easy. My husband, Bob, seemed distant, as if he couldn't understand the gravity of the situation. I had hoped that during such a difficult time, he would be my support, but he didn't show it. The only thing Bob seemed interested in was himself, his job, his comfort. He didn't even help me take care of things around the house, let alone spend time with my father. It was hard to admit, but I was beginning to feel alone. Bob never helped with anything. Even when I was exhausted from work and caring for my father, he found ways to avoid the housework. I had always imagined marriage to be a partnership, a team effort. But with Bob, it felt like I was carrying all the weight. I remember one night, after I had been juggling both the hospital visits and the chores, I confronted him. "Bob," I said, "we need to talk about this. You can't keep avoiding your responsibilities. You need to help me around the house." His response was cold and indifferent. "I'm tired too. You're better at it anyway. Just do it." It was the same thing every time. He never appreciated what I did. Never even offered a simple thank you. But there was something else, something that bothered me even more. Bob's mother. I had always gotten the feeling that she didn't approve of me. The way she looked at me when we first got engaged, as if I wasn't good enough for her son. She never said anything outright, but I could always tell. And when we got married, things didn't improve. In fact, they got worse. Bob's mother had a strange way of controlling things, especially money. I had tried to make an effort to bond with her, sending thoughtful gifts for holidays, like a scarf for Mother's Day. But instead of showing gratitude, she criticized it, saying it wasn't from a famous brand and that it was ridiculous to give something so ordinary. I was shocked. I tried to explain that the scarf was high quality, but she wouldn't hear of it. Bob, of course, didn't stand up for me. He just said, "Just do as she says, Elena." That was it. No defense, no support. By our 7th year of marriage, things were falling apart. Bob's mother was practically living with us, finding any excuse to visit and ask for money. Despite having a job myself, Bob's income barely covered our expenses. We had to dip into our savings just to get by. And Bob, he didn't seem to care. Every time his mother demanded money, he would just hand it over without hesitation, without even considering how hard I was working to keep everything afloat. I was growing resentful. I worked full-time, handled all the housework, and supported Bob's mother financially. Yet Bob seemed more focused on his mother's needs than mine. I began to feel like I was invisible, like my efforts were going unnoticed. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't the life I wanted. I had sacrificed so much for this marriage, but it seemed like it was never enough. Then came the phone call that would change everything. My father, who had been in and out of the hospital for months, finally called me one day to talk. His voice was frail, but I could hear the calm acceptance in his words. "Elena, I need you to listen to me," he said. "Don't let yourself suffer for the wrong reasons. Life is too short." I didn't understand at first, but my father, despite his illness, was clear. "Your happiness matters. Don't ignore it. You won't have to worry about anything after I'm gone. Just promise me you'll think about your own future." I was shaken to my core. My father, the man who had always protected me, was now telling me to protect myself. It was a strange feeling, but it resonated deeply with me. For the first time in years, I began to question everything: my marriage, my sacrifices, my own happiness. The days after that conversation with my father felt surreal. I kept thinking about what he had said. What did I deserve? Did I deserve to keep living in this constant state of neglect and frustration? My heart was torn, but I knew deep down that something had to change. Just 5 months later, my father passed away quietly in his sleep. The grief was suffocating. I had lost the most important person in my life, and nothing seemed to matter anymore. Bob, of course, didn't help with the funeral arrangements. He showed little interest in the process, and when he did attend the funeral, he didn't even look at me. His mother, however, seemed more than happy to be there, as if she was somehow entitled to mourn as well. It was during the funeral that I received the call from the lawyer. My father's estate was to be divided, and I was the sole heir. The inheritance was worth over $5 million, money that my father had earned not only from his work as a doctor, but also from his investments in real estate. As I sat down with the lawyer and listened to the details, I felt a mix of surprise and anxiety. I had never expected anything like this. My father's wealth had always been something of a mystery to me, something he never flaunted. And now, it was mine. Returning home, I laid the inheritance papers on my desk, still trying to process everything. It felt overwhelming, the weight of such responsibility. I was so exhausted that I ended up falling asleep on the couch, clutching the papers. When I woke up, I heard Bob and his mother talking in the next room, their voices filled with excitement. "Wow," Bob said. "This is incredible. $5 million. Can you believe it?" His tone was almost too casual, too eager. I got up to see what was going on. When I walked into the room, Bob smiled at me, holding the inheritance papers in his hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "The $5 million should be split between me and my mom." I stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean, split between you and your mom?" My voice shook with anger. How could he make such a decision without consulting me? How could he look through the documents without asking? Bob's mother, without hesitation, chimed in. "Don't be greedy, Elena. This money could change all our lives." I felt my heart race. My mind was spinning, and for the first time in years, I couldn't hold back my emotions. "You think this is fair?" I asked, my voice rising. "You both think you have a right to my father's inheritance without even asking me?" Bob looked at me with a smug smile. "It's already decided," he said. "Don't worry. We'll take care of everything." In that moment, something inside me snapped. I had given so much for this family, but now I realized that no one cared about what I wanted, what I needed. All they saw was the money. The silence that followed Bob's declaration was deafening. My heart raced, and I felt the blood rush to my face in disbelief. "What do you mean, split between you and your mom?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though my mind was screaming. Bob didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, holding the inheritance papers with an unsettling calmness. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, had a wide grin plastered across her face. She looked almost smug, like she had already won something, though I couldn't understand what. "You heard him, Elena," she said, her tone almost too chipper for the situation. "You're being a bit greedy, don't you think? Bob's been nothing but generous to you. Why don't you let him and me enjoy the fruits of your father's hard work? It's the least you can do." Her words stung like a slap. The audacity of them both, especially so soon after my father's funeral. I wanted to scream, to throw them both out of my house and burn those papers, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen, my mind swirling with thoughts of betrayal and anger. The idea that Bob, the man I had married, the man who had promised to cherish me, could betray me in such a way was more than I could bear. "Are you serious right now?" I finally managed to choke out, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is my father's legacy, Bob. You think you and your mother deserve half of it? You don't even know what it feels like to lose a parent." Bob's smile faded slightly, but his expression didn't soften. "Elena, it's not about the money," he said, his voice surprisingly cold. "It's about fairness. You've always had everything handed to you. Your father was a doctor, a businessman, and now you have this massive inheritance. I've been nothing but supportive of you, haven't I?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't about fairness. It was about greed. He had always been less than supportive, leaving me to handle everything at home, the chores, the finances, and now, my father's death. Bob hadn't lifted a finger during the entire ordeal. And now, after everything, he was telling me that I should just hand over half of the inheritance to him and his mother? I turned away, unable to look at him any longer. My hands trembled, and I felt as though the room was closing in on me. I needed space. I needed air. Without a word, I walked out into the garden, hoping the cool night air would clear my thoughts. I stood there for what felt like hours, my mind racing, my emotions in turmoil. My father was gone, and now, the man I had married, the man who was supposed to stand by me, was trying to take what was mine, what was my father's. The tears I had been holding back for so long finally spilled over. My father had always told me to be strong, but in that moment, I felt nothing but weakness. After some time, I heard Bob's footsteps behind me. He didn't say anything at first, but I could feel his presence. He was trying to figure out what to say, but the words didn't come. He knew deep down that he had crossed a line, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. "Elena," he said finally, his voice softer now, though there was still a hint of defensiveness in it. "I didn't mean to hurt you. It's just, I thought it was the right thing to do. We've been together for years, and my mom and I have always looked out for each other. It's only fair that we get our share." I turned to face him, my eyes red from crying. "You've never once asked me if I needed help with anything. You've never once cared about how hard I've worked to keep this household running. And now you want to take my father's legacy? You think this is fair? You think this is right?" Bob opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "No, Bob, I'm done. I don't care about your excuses anymore. I'm not sharing anything with you. This money, this inheritance, it's mine. It's all I have left of my father." I didn't wait for his response. I turned on my heel and walked back into the house, slamming the door behind me. Bob stood outside for a moment, stunned by my words, but I didn't care. I had finally stood up for myself, for my father's memory, and for the life I had worked so hard to build. Inside, I collapsed onto the couch, my body racked with sobs. The weight of everything, the grief, the betrayal, the exhaustion, finally took its toll. For a while, I just let the tears come, hoping they would wash away the anger and hurt that had been building for years. But the feeling of betrayal lingered, like a shadow that refused to leave. I had always tried to be a good wife, a good daughter, a good person. Yet, no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. Not for Bob, not for his mother, and certainly not for myself. As I lay there in the silence of my home, I realized something. I couldn't keep living like this. I had to make a change. I had to protect what little I had left. My father's memory, my inheritance, and most importantly, my own peace of mind. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I needed to make sure that my father's estate was protected, that Bob wouldn't get his hands on a penny. I explained the situation and asked him to help me make sure everything was in order. I also made an appointment with a financial advisor to figure out how to manage my inheritance, something I had never had to think about before. But even as I took these steps, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Bob's greed had been revealed, and there was no turning back. I didn't know how I was going to navigate this new reality, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Bob, take what was rightfully mine. Later that afternoon, Bob came home, but he didn't seem eager to discuss what had happened the night before. His usual charm was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that hung in the air. He barely spoke to me, only nodding in acknowledgement before retreating to the bedroom. It was clear that the distance between us was growing, and I felt it with every passing minute. I knew we couldn't continue like this, but I didn't know what the future held. All I could do was take one day at a time, and hope that somehow I would find the strength to move forward. For my father. For myself. And as the days went by, the reality of what Bob had done continued to eat at me. I realized that I wasn't just fighting for the inheritance anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, for the respect that I had long been denied. I couldn't let this man I had loved, continue to drain me of everything I held dear. I had to make a choice, a hard choice, but it was one that would ultimately define the rest of my life. The following weeks were a blur. Every day, I woke up with a heavy heart, dreading the moment when Bob would approach me again, asking about the inheritance, or trying to convince me to share it. I knew that the tension between us couldn't last forever. Something had to give, and I wasn't going to be the one to back down. I spent more time at my father's old clinic, trying to sort through his paperwork, handling the estate, and getting things in order. It was the only place where I could escape the madness of my home. As I sifted through the papers, I felt a connection to my father that I hadn't felt in a long time. He had always been there for me, even when my mother passed away. Now, I was carrying on his legacy, and I would make sure that no one, especially Bob, would take that away from me. But there was another issue gnawing at me. Bob's mother. While Bob was avoiding the conversation, his mother had been more than persistent. She would call almost daily, asking for money, suggesting I invest in various schemes, and even hinting that she had a right to the inheritance. I couldn't believe how bold she had become. She had always been difficult, but now it seemed like she was testing my limits. I had to put my foot down. One afternoon, after yet another phone call from her, I decided it was time to confront Bob's mother directly. I had put it off long enough, hoping she would back off, but there was no more room for silence. When Bob was at work, I called her over to the house. She arrived promptly, as expected, her usual smile plastered on her face. But today, I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. Today, I was going to stand my ground. "Sit down, please," I said, gesturing to the couch. "We need to talk." She sat down, her expression as smug as ever. "What's the matter, Elena? Are you still upset about the inheritance?" "Yes," I said firmly, taking a deep breath. "I am. And I need you to understand something. This money, this inheritance, is mine. It was left to me by my father, and I will decide what to do with it." Her smile faltered slightly, but she quickly regained composure. "But Elena, you know that Bob and I have supported you all these years. Surely we deserve a little something in return." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I've given enough. I've done enough. I've been a good wife, a good daughter-in-law, but you've crossed a line. I'm done giving." Her face turned red with anger, and for a moment I thought she might lash out. But instead, she forced a smile and stood up. "Well, if that's how you feel, then I guess we're done here." I watched as she turned and left the house, but something about the way she walked, head held high, shoulders back, told me this wasn't the end. There was more to come. Later that evening, Bob came home and immediately noticed the tension in the air. He glanced at me nervously but didn't say anything. I knew he was waiting for me to make the next move, but I wasn't going to let him off the hook so easily. "I spoke to your mother," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "And I told her what I thought. I told her that I wouldn't give her any money, that the inheritance is mine." Bob's face went pale. "You did what?" he asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "I did," I replied, "and I meant it. I'm not going to let anyone take what's rightfully mine." Bob took a step back, his face contorting in frustration. "Elena, you're being unreasonable. This is a family matter. You can't just shut us out like this." I stood up, walking towards him slowly, every step measured. "No, Bob, you're the one who's unreasonable. All these years, I've been the one who has given, who has supported, and who has carried everything on my shoulders. But now I'm done. I won't let you or your mother take advantage of me anymore." There was a long pause, a silence that stretched between us like a chasm. Bob's eyes flickered with anger, but there was something else there too. Something that resembled guilt, maybe even fear. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "I never meant for it to come to this, Elena. I never meant to hurt you. I was just so used to having things go my way. And now everything's falling apart." I looked at him, seeing him in a way I never had before. This wasn't the man I had married. The man I had married had promised to make me happy, to cherish me, to stand by me. But somewhere along the way, that promise had been broken. And now, it was too late to fix it. "I'm sorry, Bob," I said, my voice steady but full of sorrow. "But I can't do this anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes, the understanding that our marriage, the life we had built, was irreparably damaged. Maybe it had always been broken. Maybe I had been blind to it for too long. I turned and walked out of the room, heading for the garden. I needed some space to think, to breathe. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my skin, and I felt a strange sense of freedom wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel like I had to keep holding on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. The next few weeks were difficult. Bob moved out, and our marriage came to an end. It was painful, but also liberating. I focused on the future, on what my father had left behind for me, not just in terms of money, but in terms of the values he had instilled in me. Hard work, integrity, and self-respect. These were the things I held on to, and they were enough to keep me going. As for the inheritance, I decided to use it to secure my future and invest in causes that mattered to me. I didn't need Bob or his mother to validate me or my choices. I had learned the hard way that I had to trust myself. Years later, I would look back on that time and realize how far I had come.